Hey guys, so a whole ton of pretty consequential new Senate polls have been released over the last couple of days. We have new data from all 5 of the most competitive races this year, these being in the states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, as well as polls from some less competitive races in states like Iowa and Connecticut. However, in Iowa, the race is significantly closer than we thought, as a new A-plus rated pollster has Chuck Grassley only ahead by 3%, despite him running for his 8th term in office. We also have a new poll from Ohio, Vance up by 4, according to the most Republican pollster in the country, and then a new poll from Utah shows Evan McMullen actually leading against Mike Lee as he attempts to flip the seat, running as an independent. So we have a lot of new polling data to go over today, and so in this video we'll be taking a look at these new polls and what they mean for their elections in November. And so we're going to start off with this first poll here from Iowa released just today, which shows Chuck Grassley only leading over Michael Franken by 3%. This is the closest poll any independent pollster has had this race, and this poll was conducted by Seltzer & Co., an A-plus rated pollster according to 538. And so at this point in time, Chuck Grassley leads by 7.4% against his Democratic challenger, and it looks like right now the election in Iowa for Senate is going to be closer than any election we've seen with Chuck Grassley in it since his first election back in 1980. Just look back to 2016, Chuck Grassley easily won re-election to a 7th term, winning by 24%. In 2010, he won by an even larger margin, 31%, and then back in 2004, it was a margin of 42%. Chuck Grassley's margins have been decreasing as he's gotten older, and age is definitely a major issue for this election. Michael Franken is significantly younger than Chuck Grassley, who will be well into his 90s by the time that he finishes his 8th term. If he is elected and leaves office in 2029, he'll be closer to 100 than he is to 90, and that is an issue for Iowa voters. That's why Michael Franken is doing so well, on top of the fact that Michael Franken really is a stronger challenger to the Republicans than Teresa Greenfield was in 2020. And so I think that right now, the Iowa election is going to be likely Republican. I don't think Chuck Grassley is going to win by over 15%, but he's definitely still the favored candidate. A 7-time incumbent, it still will be very difficult to defeat him for the Democratic Party. Next up, in Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal is only ahead by 5% against Leora Levy, and this really is pretty surprising because in 2016, Blumenthal won his 2nd term by almost 30 points, and despite him still being in the lead, his polling average margin is only 11.7%, almost a third of what the margin was for him just 6 years ago. Leora Levy is running a strong campaign to challenge the incumbent Democrat, but there really is not enough time for her to actually pull out a win. I don't think she'll be able to do enough in the coming weeks to flip this race around. Richard Blumenthal is still on track to winning re-election to a 3rd term, although I don't think he's going to win by a solid margin. I do think he will win by at least double digits. So just like Iowa, Connecticut is also going to be a likely state, but instead for the Democratic Party. In the state of Ohio, J.D. Vance leads by 4 points against Tim Ryan. This is according to the Trafalgar Group, which means that this poll probably overestimates Republicans, which means that this election is going to be one of the most competitive ones of the year. And being a race in Ohio, I think that is pretty surprising. Ohio is obviously shifting more and more to the right every single year. But with the fact that J.D. Vance was not a good choice by the GOP, Tim Ryan is definitely in this election. According to 538, he has a pretty significant chance at winning. He has a 29% chance at winning this election, and J.D. Vance is only projected to win by 3.6%. In a year like 2022, this really is a very weak margin, and I do think that if this election were held in a 2018-like environment, J.D. Vance would lose to Tim Ryan, but obviously Joe Biden is currently in the White House, and I don't think he's doing Tim Ryan any favors. Tim Ryan may be ahead in the polls, but in the very end, he's probably going to underperform and lose this election. However, we do have some time left, and unlike in Connecticut, I do think Tim Ryan can make up the deficit in the next couple of weeks if things go very well for him, but at this point in time, we cannot bet on that happening, which is why I still do believe that J.D. Vance is going to win his 1st term to succeed Rob Portman this November. But this election will still be one to watch, as Tim Ryan is definitely making an impact. The Ohio Senate election is going to be one of the closest ones of the year. That was definitely not something that was expected to occur at the beginning of this year, but J.D. Vance's numbers simply aren't high enough for this race to be likely Republican. I currently have it as a lean state for the GOP. We also have a new poll out of Illinois showing Tammy Duckworth ahead by 14 points against Kathy Salvi. She is going to win this race by a solid margin. She even did so in 2016 when she defeated an incumbent, that being Mark Kirk, who was elected in 2010. And so this win in Illinois was one of only 2 flips that cycle, with the other one being in New Hampshire with Maggie Hassan defeating Kelly Ayotte, but that election was significantly closer. Tammy Duckworth is definitely on track to winning her re-election to a second term. Kathy Salvi is a very generic establishment Republican. She really doesn't have any chance at winning this race, and so Duckworth is currently leading by solid margins in the polling average, and that's probably the margin she's going to win by in the very end. I don't think it's going to deviate too much from her 2016 margin, and down the line, there is a chance that she runs for president, and I do think she can be successful at least winning over the support of the Democratic Party. And now moving on to what is arguably one of the biggest elections of the year. This is the race between John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz. John Fetterman currently leads by 2 points, according to the latest poll conducted by the Trafalgar Group. Even the most right-wing pollster in the country has Democrats flipping the seat currently held by retiring incumbent Pat Toomey. And so when looking at the polling average, the race has definitely gotten a lot closer in just the last month. At this point in time in September, John Fetterman was leading by 9.5%. His margin is now just 5.7. However, you have to consider the fact that Democrats were never going to win by 10%. They were never even going to win by 8 or 7. And even now at 5.7%, John Fetterman is not going to win by this margin. I think he'll be happy to even be able to win by 2 to 3 points, because Pennsylvania is still a very purple state, and 2022 is not the best year for Democrats. Mehmet Oz may not be a good candidate, but that does not mean that John Fetterman is going to destroy him. I think that if Fetterman was running against Doug Mastriano for this seat, yes, he could win by 5.7%, but against Mehmet Oz, that probably is not going to happen. However, Fetterman has led in every single poll that has ever been released for this race. This race has never been tied according to any poll, and John Fetterman has always maintained a pretty strong advantage against his Republican opponent, and so that's why he is the preferred candidate here. I do think John Fetterman is going to defeat Mehmet Oz this November, but I don't think it's going to be by as large of a margin as polling has ever suggested for this race. This race is always going to be close, even when the polls showed Fetterman ahead by 12%. And so the 538 forecast right now gives John Fetterman a 72% chance at winning, and he was not always the favorite candidate. Just look back at the very beginning when this forecast was first released. John Fetterman only had a 35% chance at victory. This race has definitely gotten closer and closer, and I do actually agree with the 530 forecast for this election. I do think a 3-point margin of victory is reasonable for the Democratic lieutenant governor, and so that's why right now I have Pennsylvania as a lean Democratic state. Next up in Arizona, this is another must-win race for Democrats, I think even more so than Pennsylvania, because Democrats, if they do not flip Pennsylvania, they can still win by holding on to Nevada, even though that's looking like it's going to be less and less likely. But if Democrats lose Arizona, they're probably not going to win in Georgia or Pennsylvania, and I think that a loss in Arizona will almost guarantee a defeat for Democrats in terms of trying to win the majority for a second time in a row. So right now, Mark Kelly leads by 6.3% in the polls, and so we have a couple of new polls here showing Mark Kelly ahead by some pretty significant margins, even the polls conducted by these Republican super PACs, and this really just shows that Mark Kelly is a much better candidate than Blake Masters. Blake Masters was a mistake for Republicans to choose. I think just like Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania, Herschel Walker in Georgia, or J.D. Vance in Ohio, the fact that Republicans chose these nominees is why they're doing so poorly. Mark Kelly could have lost his re-election this year if we saw some better candidates from the Republican side, but that simply is not what we got. Blake Masters is one of the worst nominees for the GOP this year, and that's why Mark Kelly has led, just like John Fetterman, in every single poll for his race. There's not been a single tied poll, on a single poll showing Mark Kelly losing to Masters. Even polls conducted by the most Republican pollsters, even the Trafalgar Group has Mark Kelly winning this race, and 538 also favors Mark Kelly pretty significantly, even more so than they favor John Fetterman, as according to their forecast, Mark Kelly currently has an 80% chance at victory, a 4 in 5 chance that Kelly is going to win re-election to his first full term in office after being elected in the 2020 special election. And just like in the Pennsylvania race, the odds have only gone up for Kelly in the last couple of months from 61% now up to 80%, and according to this forecast, Arizona is currently a 5.2% race. However, I do disagree with this. I do think the election is going to be closer. closer, and just like Pennsylvania, I have Arizona as a lean Democratic state. The polls are going to get it wrong. Mark Kelly is not going to win by 6 points. He's probably going to win by a margin similar to his margin back in 2020, that being 2.3%. And now moving on to the Beehive state of Utah, Evan McMullin +6 against Mike Lee. This is definitely a big deal. Mike Lee won his first term by 41% back in 2016, and now he's in one of the most competitive races of the year. Now, this poll was funded by a super PAC supporting McMullin's campaign, but if you do look at McMullin's previous poll, he was only ahead by 1. This race is definitely becoming more and more competitive, as Mike Lee and Trump Republicans really are not too popular in the state. Donald Trump is not popular in Utah. Evan McMullin actually has a positive approval rating in the state, while Lee and Donald Trump are both negatively approved of. And so right now the polling average is only Lee +6, which I really think is a surprisingly small margin, as of course Mike Lee should at least win by a solid margin against any challenger that he faces in a state as red as Utah, a state that supported the Republican Party in every single presidential election since 1976, and a state that really we have not seen a competitive Senate or governor election in the last couple of decades. And so Evan McMullin is making a significant dent on this election, as he is really giving Mike Lee a run for his money. Even the most independent polls show Lee only ahead by lean margins of victory, but right now I do still think the polls will get it wrong in Utah as well. I don't think Lee is going to win by this small of a margin. I think double digits is still within the realm of possibility, but I don't think he's going to win by over 15 points. McMullin really is running a very strong campaign, especially for an independent, but this year we are unlikely to see a third independent in the Senate joining Angus King and Bernie Sanders. So right now, Utah is going to still be a red state, but only likely. Next up, in Georgia, Raphael Warnock leads by 3 points against Herschel Walker. This is another one of those big races that Democrats have to win. If Democrats lose Georgia, they're probably not going to hold on to their majority, and if Republicans, of course, flip the state, as well as winning Nevada, they have a very good shot at taking back the upper chamber of Congress. And so we also have a couple of other new polls from the state, a poll conducted by Walker's own campaign showing him up by 2%, while some polls conducted by Quinnipiac and the University of Georgia show Warnock up by significantly larger margins. So Ralphie Warnock is definitely in a strong position to win his re-election as a result of the recent fallout against Herschel Walker. He's been exposed to have paid for an abortion, even though he's running on a very strict and extreme pro-life platform. And Herschel Walker was not a good nominee to begin with. He just had way too much baggage, and people in the GOP knew that. That's why a lot of them in the establishment did not want him to win the nomination. But with the support of Donald Trump, Herschel Walker became the GOP nominee for the Georgia Senate election to challenge Raphael Warnock, and Warnock is a pretty strong incumbent, I think better than Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, and that's why he's currently leading in this race. He is up by the largest margin ever as a result of the news stories coming out about Herschel Walker. Just a lot of negative press for him recently. He also did not perform that well in the debate a couple of days ago, but honestly, he did not do as poorly as some people had expected. So honestly, not that bad of a performance overall, but definitely not good by any standards for Herschel Walker. And so Warnock now is definitely the favorite for this race. 530, in fact, gives Warnock a lean margin of victory right now, giving him a 60% chance at winning, and they do think that Walker is going to lose by over 2 points, as Warnock is currently projected to win 50.2% of the votes. So Georgia right now, in my opinion, I think is going to be closer, and I currently have it as a tilt Democratic state. It's still Georgia, a state that's been red for decades before Biden won it in 2020, and so I don't think Warnock is going to win by any margin near 4 points, but I do think that he is in a very strong position going into the race this November. We also have a new poll out of Wisconsin showing Mandela Barnes only ahead by 1 point, despite this poll being conducted by his own campaign. I really think Democrats should be giving up now on the race in Wisconsin. They're just not going to win it. Ron Johnson was losing in the polls in 2016, and he still won his election by 3.5%. Now, he is up by 3 points. I think he is on track to winning his third term in office, and I don't think he's going to win by over 5 points, though Wisconsin is still going to be a competitive state. But honestly, Mandela Barnes is not on the pathway to victory right now at all. His polling has been going down in the last couple of months since he first won the Democratic nomination, and as the incumbent, Ron Johnson, it will be very difficult to defeat, especially in a year like this. And 538 currently gives Johnson a 71% chance of winning, and I do think that it's surprising that Wisconsin is as competitive as a state significantly more red, like Ohio and even North Carolina, we have the same odds for Republicans in all three of these elections, despite North Carolina and Ohio being much redder states than Wisconsin. And so right now, the state of Wisconsin, I currently have as being lean Republican as well. I do think Johnson is going to win, but not by a very impressive margin. In the Empire State of New York, Chuck Schumer plus 20, really not too much to talk about here. Marist College, A-rated poll, Chuck Schumer is going to win re-election, despite the governor race being much closer between Kathy Hochul as well as Lee Zeldin. The Senate race is not going to be that competitive at all. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, is clearly on track to winning his 5th term in office, and so New York is going to be a solid Democratic state. And now we have just 2 states left. These are Nevada and New Hampshire. We've already gone over many of these races here, so we're not going to cover them again. But in the Silver State, Catherine Cortez Masto leads by 2 points against Adam Laxalt. This race, I do think, is going to flip. I don't think Masto is going to win her re-election at this point. Laxalt is running a relatively strong campaign. He's not as bad of a candidate as Blake Masters is in Arizona or Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. He is significantly more moderate than many of them, and I think that Laxalt is a winnable candidate. Catherine Cortez Masto, even though she is the incumbent, she's really not that popular in the state, especially with Latino voters, even though you expect her to be doing much better with her target demographic. But Adam Laxalt right now is on track to winning this race. He's up by 0.7% in the polls, and this most recent poll here from Suffolk showing Masto up by 2 is really one of the only polls recently that have had her in the lead. Laxalt has led in basically every single poll since September, with the exception of these 2 new ones, one from USA Today and one from CNN. And so when looking at the overall map, I think Nevada is going to make a major impact, as this will increase the Republicans' chances at winning back the Senate pretty significantly if they can flip the state of Nevada. And honestly, just looking at the map here, it's very unlikely that Pennsylvania is going to be the only flip, even in 2016 when there were just 2 flips, which is a very small number of flips for a Senate year. Illinois and New Hampshire were the only 2 states that flipped, and those are still 2 states. I think that only Pennsylvania flipping this year is a very, very unlikely. I do think there will be another flip, and at this point, it looks like it is going to be in Nevada. And finally, in New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan leads by 7 points against Don Bolduc, and this race was a close race for quite a while. I mean, people were watching this election to see if Chuck Morris or Chris Sununu could beat Hassan, but with Don Bolduc as the nominee, Democrats are virtually guaranteed to win this race, with Hassan winning her 2nd term after, of course, her flip back in 2016. Don Bolduc is a terrible GOP nominee, just way too far to the right, especially for a state that leans to the left like New Hampshire. And New Hampshire went blue by solid margin on the Senate level in 2020, and although that's probably not going to happen this year, Maggie Hassan is still going to win by a likely margin, and so New Hampshire is going to be the final state we're going to fill in on this map, and I do think that Hassan will be able to win by a margin over 5%. 538 currently gives her an 84% chance at winning, and if you're interested in the odds in Nevada, Masto has a 51% chance at victory, but I do think Laxalt right now is still the preferred candidate in terms of who's going to win, and so I do think the 530 forecast is going to be wrong here, unless it does change in the next couple of weeks. And so just so that we have a little bit more complete of a map, I'm just going to fill in the races in Colorado, New Hampshire, and Florida. These ratings are pretty obvious. I don't think these are going to be too surprising at all. But right now, according to the latest polls, Democrats are in a good position to hold on to their majority, but they definitely cannot get complacent. There's still a very good chance that they lose. I mean, look at the 2 chilled races, Nevada and Georgia. If Republicans flip Georgia, they will win the Senate. If Democrats can flip the state of Pennsylvania and then hold onto Georgia, they'll be the ones controlling the Senate for the next 2 years. So definitely both parties are in contention for the majority, and I think that what will happen in the next 3 weeks will be very important in determining which party comes out on top in the end. So that'll be it for this video. Make sure you like it down below. If you enjoyed, comment down below which party do you think will win the majority after these midterms. Subscribe to my channel to stay updated on the latest news, and I'll see you guys in the next video.